I am a professor in the psychology department at the University of Washington, where I teach a very popular course on human sexuality to about 4,000 undergraduates each year. So it's a very large course, and it covers everything from sexual anatomy to sexual orientation, gender identity, sexual arousal response, pleasure, relationships, healthy relationships, long-term relationships, sexual harassment, partner violence, to sex work, and BDSM, kink, challenges in sexual function. So the course covers a lot of information. I love feeling like I'm helping people to live happier lives, because that's ultimately what we want to do as sex educators, is just make people feel more comfortable with themselves and have a greater level of self-awareness and self-acceptance, so that they can then be kinder and more compassionate towards other people as well. So
Wow, what you said is so huge, because I was thinking while you're talking, sex education in our culture, it's still a little bit taboo,
yeah,
but it's such a huge part of like who we are as human
really
beings.
is. Yes.
And so when you were saying, by helping people learn more about themselves, they become kinder and understand themselves better and more compassionate and all of that, I realized, like, wow, that is so true. The fact that we kind of shun in our society this huge aspect of our nature. I mean,
Exactly.
what kind of like psychological detriment does that have on us? I'm curious.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think that we do shame people. And it's mostly to do with the fact that as a country, we don't have any federally mandated sex education. So a lot of people are just growing up without any, information. And when we have holes in our knowledge, we tend to feel less empowered and we tend to be fearful. And so a lot of what I do is try to kind of help people by empowering them with knowledge, because if you have more understanding, it lets you exactly kind of embrace your own identity, your own sexuality, and it really allows you to appreciate that people come in a very wide, diverse array of different types of sexual expressions and identities and things that people enjoy. We're not all the same.
Kinsey Institute has actually been doing research and studies on live Jasmin specifically.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah.
didn't know that. I'm good friends with Justin Lee Miller, so
Yes.
that's good to
He's
know.
part of this project.
Yeah, I saw that on the list you sent. Yeah.
Um, yeah, they've actually been conducting research and studies, interviewing our members. And one thing that they found is that the models that do the best and have
Oh,
the highest earnings, actually, several of them aren't even really engaging in any type of super explicit content, or even conversation.
right.
It's actually the connection that
Yeah,
is the most successful. And I think that's why camming is so different from like porn.
completely different. Absolutely. Because camming really circumvents a lot of the problems with porn, because it's real, right? I mean, it's real. And I think that especially in today's day and age with, social media, and especially with, Instagram, where you have sort of these perfectly posed pictures of people are craving authenticity, and people feel connected to people when they feel what they're seeing is real. And that's what camming really offers, I think, is that element of authenticity, so people can really feel like they're connected with a person who they wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with, if they didn't have something like Live Jasmin. So
Well, I
yeah.
want to talk to you about that because, we are coming out of this crazy time period for all of us where we were in isolation, most of us, and to some degree
Yes.
due to the pandemic. And I'm curious, obviously during that time, the numbers on platforms like Live Jasmin were skyrocketing because
Yep.
people were needing some form of connection. And I want to ask you your expert opinion on what are the consequences we face if we're not able to get some of the, at least some form of that connection. So, during the pandemic, it turned very digital for many people. But let's say that live Jasmin wasn't even an option and there were several people that were just at home alone all the time. What does that do to us as human beings?
Well, there is really robust research on this basically fundamental human drive known as the need to belong. And the need to belong is really kind of at the base of so much of our behavior. And it's not just to belong in the sense of, going along with a group. It's about really feeling that sense of connection. And one of the things that's really clearly come out of that research is, there's this question of, well, what does it take to have that feeling of belongingness, right? What does it take for us to feel connected to another person? And basically it comes down to two things, which is, a few people who you feel really closely connected to. And, so it doesn't have to be a million people, but sort of like, a handful of people who you feel connected to. And there has to be frequent, regular interactions. Now, this research was done, a long time ago. So how define those frequent interactions is changing. And I think that because so much of our, face-to-face is obviously great, and being able to talk on the phone is great. But I think that being able to, Zoom and see somebody on a screen, I probably it's somewhere in between the telephone, which is a little bit more removed, but it's essential. And I think, like as you pointed out, during lockdown, when everyone's kind of in their own space and not allowed to be out socializing with people, it became really critical, right? And it's interesting because the other research that came out of the Kinsey Institute, I know, looking at people's sexual behavior during the pandemic, is that we kind of saw this almost bifurcation where some people, either because of fear or, being isolated at home, had less sexual activity, whereas another, about half the population actually had more sexual activity. And so they, had opportunities, and they tried different types of sex, right? They were more likely to try novel types of sex, or to have kinkier types of sex, or to explore porn or camming. And, that makes sense because, just because you're in the middle of a pandemic, it doesn't mean that our need for connection and touch and just feeling like we belong to something and have a real connection, that doesn't go away. If anything, it becomes more important, I think, when we're in times when we're sort of frightened and not sure about the state of the world. So
Absolutely. It's almost as if like you said, we're frightened, we're uncertain, we don't know what's going on. None of us had experienced anything like that before. And so it's almost like we want to go back to our fundamental needs as human beings, which is connection, right?
yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason when researchers look at longevity, right? Like what makes a person live a long, happy, healthy life. Social support is the biggest predictor of that, right? So, physical health is obviously important, exercise, nutrition, but really, really, when you look at people who live to be 100 plus years old, it's that they have those relationships, right? It's that they have that connection with other people. And then beyond that, there's also research that shows that yes, those meaningful connections that are really deep and long lasting with people are critically important for just about every aspect of our emotional and physical health. But small daily interactions are also important, right? They contribute to our level of happiness. So one of the other things that happened during the pandemic is you're not having that conversation with the barista when you go to get your coffee. You're not seeing, your colleague for a few minutes and catching up in the office. You're not sitting next to somebody on a bus and maybe exchanging a few words. And those little interactions actually add up in a big way to give us that boost in happiness and to help us maintain sound mental health. So I think camming also fits into that because it provides kind of that type of interaction where even if it's something that you're not spending a ton of time on each day, it's giving you that level of connection that is small, that overall contributes to your happiness.
That's so well said. Thank you so much. You know, when you think about it, these members are all paying money to engage with the model. And so, I mean, just basic logic here would say that if it were just about sexual content, they could go to a porn site and get it for free.
Yeah.
So there's something more here. And I'm curious, from your opinion, what do you think has members paying for the interaction? And at least like with Live Jasmin, we have a high rate of returning members. So they're coming back. It's not just this one-time experience. It's years and years and years. I mean, I've interviewed members that have been a member for 15, 20 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm not at all surprised by that, because if you think about it, you can go and you can watch pornography, and you can consume it and enjoy it, but you're not going to feel like you have a relationship with the person that you're watching. And there's not that authenticity that we were talking about. You're watching something that's rehearsed and that's a performance. But when you're coming to something like Live Jasmin, you're actually getting to see an actual person and how they're responding. And there are ways to have them respond specifically to you, or to see how they respond with other people. Unlike porn, where really what you're watching is a performance with people who aren't interacting with you, aren't acknowledging that you're present, don't care that you're present, nor should they, right? Because they're filming for a performance. When you come to something like Live Jasmin and you're watching a camera, you're getting this sense of authenticity, and you're getting a sense that they're really responding to you as an individual and in response to your particular needs and desires. And there are ways where it's also, I think for a lot of people, it probably feels very safe, because you can contribute however you want to, right? You can kind of start out sitting back and just watching, or you can communicate with, whoever the model is who's performing, and ask them to do, certain things that you're interested in. So I think, again, it's because it has this interactive component and realness to it, which is what people are so craving today. Because technology has just made us more lonely in a lot of ways. We're hiding behind our digital devices, always communicating, but of course, digital technology can bring us closer together when there is that live, authentic component to it. So, so I think it's about kind of maximizing those opportunities for connection and feeling like you're talking to a real person, not a model that you can't really connect with. So
if you could put into one word, what, in your opinion, might be the biggest benefit that most members are getting from Live Jasmin that keeps them coming back, what would you say that it is?
A sense of connection, and a sense of a safe exploration of their sexuality, and an ability to feel like they're, getting their sexual needs met in a way that feels simultaneously safe, fun, exciting, connected, and real.
Incredible.
That's way more than one word. Sorry.
You know what? It's way better than one word. So thank you.
Okay.
You mentioned, feeling safe to explore their sexuality. And I want to go back to something we kind of touched on earlier, which is, why are we still so uncomfortable with the topic of our sexuality, even here in this culture? Why?
Yes, I know. Well, I guess we need to thank our Protestant roots, right? Of growing up in a culture where sex has just been taboo and viewed as, stigmatizing. And the thing we have to remember is that, it's not just our Protestant roots. I mean, prior to 10,000 years ago, people lived in tribes and, walked around naked and had, open, often polyamorous relationships. There wasn't any kind of stigma or bias associated with sexuality. It was all kind of accepted and just natural and part of life. And it wasn't until about 10,000 years ago when agriculture was developed, there was, a simultaneous explosion in population growth, and all of a sudden people had to learn to live together in these settled city states, kind of the beginning of these cities. And all of a sudden, when you have large numbers of people living together, that was when sex became viewed as something as potentially dangerous, as something that could make people act out in ways that would be not good for society. And the institution of marriage really came about then, because it was, marriage was viewed originally as something that was just a contract, really just a way for property rights and family lineage to get passed down. And, if you didn't limit and, sexuality, there was this fear, the last thing you want is a marriage breaking up because someone's has some kind of sexual desire that is out of control. But our natural state, if you go back to the hunter-gatherers, is to be a sexual species, right? I mean, it's the same thing if you look at, genetically, our closest genetic cousin is the bonobo monkey. And, they love to have sex. They have sex in every opportunity. They come into a situation and they're all about to eat and they're about to, have a sort of a stressful experience where they may have to be negotiating who gets how much food. Their solution is they all have sex first to kind of calm everybody's nerves. And they have same sex sex. They have, different, it's a very egalitarian society. Females have a much sort of stronger role with the bonobo monkeys. So that is something that we see is in a culture where you have a more sort of egalitarian, sort of where both genders are more equal. You tend to see kind of a more acceptance of, there's more sex positivity, as opposed to the chimpanzees that are just aggressive and really are only having sex for procreation. So yeah, but I mean, the bonobo monkey is actually our closest genetic cousin, and we're programmed to be sexual. We're programmed to want to use sex as a way to connect with other people. We're programmed to want to use sex as a way to calm ourselves down, as a way to soothe ourselves. We're programmed to have all different types of sex. Dolphins are more sexual than people give them credit for. So dolphins are actually one of the few species they actually make sex toys. So I know. So it's, maybe a little bit, most people might kind of have the reaction of ew, but yeah, they'll actually find like dead fish and use those basically as like their own dolphin fleshlight. Yeah. And, dolphins are an extremely intelligent, egalitarian species. And so, yeah, when you look at species that have more advanced, intelligent brains, you see that sex is a much more accepted and integral part of their social fabric. So I think we just need to kind of own that and understand that that's who we are, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about or feel ashamed of. And yeah, knowledge is power.
Well, I'm fascinated by everything you said. I am, no, really, the few things you said are some of the most interesting things I have heard in a long time, which I love. It sounds like we kind of were comfortable with our sexuality. It wasn't really an issue. And then 10,000 years ago,
yeah, suddenly we had to live together. Suddenly there were a lot more of us because we realized that rather than hunting and gathering food, that we could grow a lot more food a lot more efficiently if we planted seeds and grew corn and vegetables and crops. And so what happens with any population is when there's a lot of food, there's a lot of procreation. So suddenly there's a lot more human beings than there were before, and we have to learn to live together. And that's when sex became viewed as dangerous. Before that, it was just viewed as part of human life. I mean, we just didn't have all these rules, and we didn't stigmatize each other, and we didn't try to view our sexual partners as property. Yeah, the patriarchy really didn't begin until we exploded into these city states. So it's something to consider. And that's why I really kind of, push back on people that try to claim that, certain types of sex aren't natural, or that certain types of sex acts aren't natural, or that certain types of gender expressions or sexual expressions aren't natural, or that camming isn't natural. That it's just ridiculous, right? I mean, I'm sure that if you go back from the beginning of time, sex work is one of the oldest industries in the world. There's a reason for that. There's a need for that. And it's not one that we should be ashamed of. So,
That's so true, that sex work is it, and it's something even for me that sometimes I'm like, because I know camming is considered sex work, but in this particular case, it's fascinating because the two people, not once do they even smell each other. You know what I mean? Like, it's literally much more of a conversation and performance,
yes.
like,
Yes.
it's so, yeah.
It is. It's a conversation, and it's a performance, but it's one that's attuned to the person who's watching and giving feedback and making requests, and that's responsive to that, right? And the beauty of camming is that, unlike prostitution, which I'm not saying, I advocate for rights of all sex workers. I think it's just has this element of empowerment, because you have these webcammers who, they can just flop their computer down at any moment if things feel out of control. They own that room. They, have this sense of empowerment. And, when people are like, oh, well, that kind of work is so degrading. I'm sorry, is going and sitting in a cubicle where you're getting bossed around by somebody and getting paid $15 an hour, is that really empowering? Like, how is that not degrading, but being a camera is degrading? That makes no sense. So you can have your own hours, you make a lot of money. It's something there's a great need for. So yeah, I think it should be, I think as long as there's consent and everyone's safe and I think it's amazing. I think it's offering a great service.
I love what you said. You're so right. Like, you know, going and sitting in a cubicle and just being told what to do for 8, 9 hours, like, and like you said, the $15 an hour, when some of these women, it's like they're becoming millionaires.
Yes.
They are traveling the world and they're
Yes.
working from home on their time when
Their
they want.
schedule.
Yeah.
Exactly. On
They
their schedule.
and
Mm-hmm.
they say like camming is solving a childcare crisis.
Yes, I was just going to bring that up. I mean, for a working mom to be able to have, I mean, look, I appreciate that, right? As a professor, I have a lot of flexibility over my schedule because I have to be in a classroom for 5 hours a week. I work all the time. I work my butt off, but I can schedule all that work when it works for me. I also have 3 children and a husband. So I have to be able to find, and I think that in today's day and age, if having that type of flexibility is so important for women, especially so that you can get all of your needs met and have it all, so to speak, in a way that makes sense for you and that prioritizes the things to you that are most important. So, I mean, why would you, to say to a webcammer that that's degrading work, it's not good for you. I mean, I'm sorry, but there's so many other jobs that I can think of that are so much more degrading.
I agree. And some of these girls are not even getting nude.
Are not even getting nude. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that just shows you that it's not just it's about connection, right? And that's really when sex is real, when sex is authentic, when people are present in their bodies and not viewing themselves from a third party perspective and spectatoring, when people are really real, sexuality is an experience that connects you to another person, that meets a very fundamental human, psychological, emotional need, not just physical. So I think with camming, the fact that some of these incredibly successful cammers are making a killing just by interacting and responding to their clients without even having to necessarily take their clothes off really kind of hits home to that. So
I completely agree. It's interesting. I was interviewing a member a couple weeks ago, and his favorite model, who he spends the most money and time on, in fact, I don't think he sees any other model on the site anymore, is a non-nude model. And he
wow.
initially came to the site for just a quick sexual experience, somehow found himself in her room, and she's in a category it's actually prohibited in this category to get nude. So she doesn't show anything.
Anything. Yeah.
And that's his favorite model. And he came to the site looking for the opposite. And now he's been a member for 3 years and he spends all his money on her, you know?
Yeah, that's amazing. And he has found someone who he connects with and probably feels like he has a relationship with and is fulfilled in a way that's incredibly meaningful to him, or else he wouldn't spend all that money on it. So
Absolutely. And, I've heard from members too. I'm curious what your thoughts are around this, but I've talked to members who are recently divorced and they're like, I don't want the drama of a relationship right now, but I
yeah,
want the connection,
yeah. Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly right. We live in, society that kind of pushes sort of traditional monogamy as the only way to be happy. And that's just not true for a lot of people. And whether it's having connections with multiple people or whether it's just being at a time in your life when that's not something that you're really looking for, but you want to have kind of connections that keep you feeling, present and happy and fulfilled. That's exactly right. It's just there's so many ways to connect and so many different levels that you can connect with a person at. We need to honor them all and not be dismissive.
So would you say that we actually as a species are not, it sounds like we're not naturally monogamous, but we've been trained into it?
Well, this is an issue of really hot debate. So there, on the one hand, there's sort of there's this very well-known book that came out called Sex at Dawn, where the
Yes.
author, do you know that book?
Yes.
So there's sort of that camp, right? And so they point to the fact that, they look at things like dolphins and bonobos that have all these different sexual experiences with multiple partners. They, have anthropological evidence that suggests that when we were in these hunter-gatherer tribes, we always had, multiple sexual partners. And so that monogamy is really maybe not what we're meant to do, which isn't to say, they make the point that that doesn't mean that you can't be incredibly happy in a monogamous relationship. It's just that you have to be aware of its challenges and plan for those and navigate those. For example, I am in a monogamous relationship, have been for 20 years, and I'm very happy in it. It works very well for me, but it is not without its challenges. And I've definitely had to, my husband and I came in with our eyes wide open to that and find ways and invest a lot of effort in trying to kind of maintain passion in our own relationship, but we don't assume it's a given. But at the same time, so it's interesting. The authors of Sex at Dawn make this interesting analogy where they talk about how it's a little bit like choosing to be, monogamy is almost like choosing to be a vegetarian or a vegan. Everyone has canine teeth. We evolved to eat meat, but some people choose not to eat meat, maybe for ethical reasons, or, it's more sustainable, it's maybe healthier in some ways. So, and they're very happy, but, as he points out, it doesn't mean that bacon's going to stop smelling good. It's just understanding how you navigate those limitations. But then you have Helen Fisher, whose research is probably another name you've heard of, very famous researcher. Helen Fisher's work shows us that, people are meant to pair bond, and that's really sort of the parts of our brain that light up when you fall in love are kind of at the most basic primal level of our brain. So she makes the argument that we are meant to be monogamous, in that we fall in love, we connect with somebody, we have dopamine that hits the reward system when we meet somebody, we have, serotonin levels drop, we become obsessed, we literally become obsessed, and then over time it evolves into something that's a little bit more of like a calmer, deeper love. But she points out that we probably have evolved to be not necessarily monogamous for 30, 40 years, but to be somewhat serial monogamous, where the idea is that you meet someone, fall in love, have a child, and then, at some point, infidelity happens. Sometimes it's kept a secret. Sometimes it's the end of the marriage and people move on. And there are some anthropologists that have said, well, that makes sense for us to do, because if you think about it from an evolutionary point of view, if we're wired to fall in love with one person and have that kind of highly passionate time, we connect with them at that level. That usually leads to high sexual desire, probably, procreation, maybe a child is born. And it's usually at around that 2, 3, 4 year mark that high passion starts to decline. And anthropologists say, well, that makes perfect sense, because if they've had a child, that's about the time when the child is a little bit more independent, doesn't need to be carried by mom, can run around. And so at that point, we've evolved to then go look for another sexual partner to have more children. So, who knows? There's Dan Savage has his view on being monogamish, which is that he believes in monogamy, but he thinks that, it's okay to have varying levels of monogamy where, sometimes you might have another sexual partner where it's, agreed upon and that's established and communicated and there's full transparency and honesty. So I don't think anyone can really truly answer the question of whether we're meant to be monogamous. I think it varies for different people. I think we're all wired in slightly different ways, but I think everyone needs to just be really intentional when they choose the relationship structure that works best for them, because the relationship structure that works best for you isn't going to necessarily work for other people. Camming might work great and give a tremendous sense of fulfillment and meet a person where they are with their needs in that one particular time and not another person. But that doesn't mean that other person for whom camming does nothing and gives no gratification should be judging the person who does get a lot of gratification and fulfillment from developing a relationship with a cammer. So, yeah.
Beautifully said. I'm blown away. Seriously, that was just so well said. And you're absolutely right. I think how you tied it all back together, like, hey, here's the research here, here's the research there, here's some research in the middle. And at the end of the day, what works for this person during this time of their life may not even work for them tomorrow. So what we need to do is just accept people for where they're at and for the choices that they're making. And I think that kind of actually ties together our actual fundamental need, which is to be connected and accepted with the group. So it's like we could all just come together and just let each other do our thing, but understand that we're still together in the group in the sense of humans like to be connected. Like,
exactly. We all need to be connected. And diversity, by the way, is a good thing, right? If you look at biology, there is diversity across the entire species of animals, of plants. It's advantageous, right? If you lived millions of years ago in a tribe where everyone was exactly the same, had the same, ways of relating to people, had the same personality, had the same skills. That's not efficient, right? I mean, the way that a society thrives is by having people who are all uniquely different and who connect in different ways. We've evolved to be different. We've evolved to have different talents. We've evolved to all contribute different things. That's why society works. We all have different talents. And what goes along with that is having different sexual interests and having different ways to express ourselves, because that's what makes art's wonderful, right? If we were all exactly the same, if we were all robots, if we were all these cookie cutter images of one another, life would be incredibly boring. And we'd never come up with creative ways of thinking about problems, right? We'd never come up with new solutions. There wouldn't be people who thought about things in completely different ways. So sexual expression is just a natural extension of that, right? People are going to have different ways of enjoying sex, of connecting with each other, different types of things that they're going to enjoy, whether it be kinks or fetishes, or whether they like, watching camming models or pornography, whatever it is, that needs to be celebrated and accepted, not shamed, not viewed as something that's dangerous or taboo.
So beautiful. You're such a great interview.
Thank you.
That is just so profound and incredible. And I really can't wait to actually really share this interview around, because it's just full of so many truths. Like, exactly. We just need to accept these differences, those differences that I think some people are maybe seeing as threatening. Like, maybe that's why we love monogamy, because anything else is a little bit too threatening for us. Those differences, like you said, though, are actually what solves problems, find solutions. And so it's, we're still needing a bit of a perspective shift.
Exactly. And to let go, I just think, especially today, there's so much sexual insecurity, and people are incredibly rejection sensitive. There's this fear that if you show who you really are and acknowledge what turns you on and who you want to be, that you'll be rejected somehow. And I think that we need to kind of get to a place as a culture where people don't fear that type of rejection and know that they're going to be embraced for whoever they are and appreciated for that type of diversity. So,
well, my one final question is, how do we create a more sex positive culture in society?
well, I think it's through education, and it's through spreading positive messages that are medically accurate, comprehensive, that don't shame people, that talk about our differences. And, it's one of the reasons that I am now so active on social media. I started this Instagram account, Nicole the Sex Professor, about a year ago, and it's taken off because people want to hear about what these differences are, what these different ways of expressing your sexuality are. And they want some place where they can go and realize, I'm not alone in that, right? I have this experience. And it's kind of that, those ways of connecting with each other where we can share our experiences and just talk and do documentaries and write articles and just get the word out that sex is something to be enjoyed and appreciated and loved. And we don't need to be afraid of it so much.
Yeah. It's so innately part of who we are. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for this incredible interview.
My pleasure. This was so much fun. You were so much fun to talk to. I'm really grateful.